Hello, my name is Rumbiza Makanda, a third year law student at Herbert Stable School of Law. I'm here to make a presentation on feminism, which is a topic found under the module we all know as jurisprudence. So, this presentation seeks to compare the depiction of women and women's lives in the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial era. And with that being said, the presenter shall make use of journal articles, textbooks, legislation, among other sources, in an attempt to unpack the scope of feminism as assigned by the coordinator of this module, that is Mr. N. Maposa. I would like to define the term feminism. So, feminism is not only a unitary concept, but a diverse, multi-faced group of ideas. It can be drawn as a philosophy of law based on the political, economic, and social equality of sexes. A feminist, at the very least, can be defined as someone who believes that women suffer discrimination based on their sex, that their specific needs that are negated, and for their satisfaction there needs to be a radical change in the social, economic, and political world. Feminism serves to expose the aspects of male domination and challenges it. This brings out the idea that women must learn to claim their space in order to satisfy and fulfill their existence, rather than being recognized as radicals whenever they opt to be involved in feminist politics. Women cannot be equal with men as long as there is no equity among men. Yet, in light of feminism, women want a status where rights, benefits, and dignities are gained at no one's expense, and where duties and obligations do not fall disproportionately on the shoulders of women. It is also important to mention the background of feminism. So, my next point directly addresses them. It should be noted that it involves political and sociological theories and philosophies concerned with issues of gender differences, as well as a movement that advocates gender equality for women and campaigns for women's rights and interests. One of the aims of feminism is dedicating the change, the rework of law, and its approach to gender. Although the terms feminism and feminists did not gain widespread use until the 1970s, they were already in the public parlance much earlier. For instance, Katharine Hepburn speaks of the feminist movement in the 1942 film Woman of the Year. According to Maggie Ham and Rebecca Walker, the history of feminism can be divided into three waves. The first wave was in the 19th and 20th century, and it was characterized by the attempts to gaining legal rights for women, such as the right to property, to vote, and demonstrate for political equality. The second wave was in the 1960s and 1970s, and by the end of the 60s, more than 80% of wives of childbearing age were using contraception after the federal government in 1960 approved a birth control pill. This freed many women from unwanted pregnancies and gave them more choices and freedom in their personal lives. The third wave extends from the 1990s to the present. Feminist theories emerged from these feminist movements. It should also be noted that any study of law and gender must account for colonialism's role in reshaping gender relations. Thus, the rise of coloniality can be partially blamed for causing the antagonisms within women and men, which calls for a power struggle between the two. And in turn, women made a move to formulate feminist theories. The next issue that I'm going to address is that of feminist theories. To begin with, I shall start with theory number one, which is known as liberal feminism. From the perspective of liberal feminism, women's legal rights to property, including property in their own person, is fit to step in the emancipation of women. Under this theory, women are generally seen as objects and had to depend on their husbands and or fathers. They are usually sidelined in the allocation of family resources, where males were sent to get education and the opposite was true for women. It should be noted that this theory is based on the notion that in order for men and women to be equal, women must be granted some privileges, and men should not be the only ones benefiting from the legislation as well as the formulation of laws. As liberal feminists continued with these movements, deep cultural changes were altering the role of women in African countries. More women than ever were entering the paid workforce, and this increased the dissatisfaction among women regarding the huge gender imbalances in pay and advancement and sexual harassment at workplaces. For instance, in Zimbabwe, some aspects of the Labor Relations Act, Chapter 2801, are relevant to gender equality, particularly Section 5 of the Act, which prohibits gender discrimination with regards to access to employment and various other aspects in a very comprehensive manner. This theory encompasses only women and fights to offer special privileges to women with the intent of making women equal to men. Another instance is that of the Legal Age of Majority Act, which made Zimbabwean women majors under the law for the very first time. In line with this legislation, women had the opportunity to represent themselves and their legal interests. Furthermore, another instance is that of the women quota. The Constitution of Zimbabwe provides a number of seats be reserved in the parliament solely for women until 2023. This was a move which aimed at granting special treatment to women if they are to recover on the gap made by men, which gave rise to women attaining high rank political positions. For instance, Joyce Teorai Mujuru, who was the first female vice president of Zimbabwe from 2004 to 2014, as well as Joanna Mamombe, who broke the record for being the youngest female parliamentarian at the age of 23, just to mention a few. Okay. The next issue that I'm going to address under the feminist theory is that one of radical feminism. This theory was developed by several radical feminists, which includes Kate Millen, who developed the notion that men have institutionalized power over women and that this power is socially constructed as opposed to biological or innate, thus formulating a new approach to feminist thinking known as radical feminism. Millet explained women's complicity in male domination by analyzing the way in which females are socialized into accepting patriarchal values and norms, which challenged the notion that female subservience is somehow natural. This is a perspective with feminism that calls for a radical reordering of the society in which male supremacy is eliminated in all social and economic content. Radical feminism questions why women must adopt certain other roles based on gender. Radical feminism attempts to draw lines biologically determined behavior in order to free both men and women as much as possible from their previous narrow gender roles. They are of the opinion that all laws that exist are highly in favor of patriarchy, and this gives rise to a big question, that is, should patriarchy be replaced with matriarchy? Yet, other schools of thought, like Anne Oakley, posit that there are distinct gender roles that come from culture rather than biological differences between men and women. These roles are learned through childhood and continue into adulthood and tend to maintain male dominance and female subservience, and they include manipulation, canalization, verbal appellation, and activity exposure. Adding on, it can also be noted that this theory negatively impacts the institution of marriage. Under the system of patriarchy, divorce was scarce and unheard of because men and women knew and kept their rightful places in marriages and societies in general. Another feminist theory that I'm going to address is known as lesbian feminism. Under this theory, most African states see permission of unconventional sexuality and recognition of same sex marriages as deviant in relation to traditional sex roles of women and men. Yet, the UDHR provides that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. It is important to note that human rights are a birthright of all human beings and are fundamental to humankind itself. Nearly half of the countries worldwide where homosexuality is outlawed are in Africa, according to a 2020 global review by the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, known as the ILGA. Put into practice, lesbian feminism quickly evolved into a personal style that influenced everything from hairstyles, clothing, and even sexual behavior. Overall, its influence was enormous, though mixed with several results. It can be noted that there are other countries which have legalized same sex and fulfillment of fundamental human rights which are provided for in the UDHR. And with a constitution that also protects against discrimination based on sexual orientation. One such country is South Africa. I'm also going to address another theory of feminism, which is known as Black feminism. Black feminism is a branch of feminism that centers around Black women. It is a theory in which it looks into the issues of race and class discrimination. In other words, Black women are positioned within structures of power in fundamentally different ways than white women. This theory also evolves around Black women's associations and experiences of sexual and gender politics. That is, from exploitation in domestic work and economic equities to sexual abuse and reproductive struggles. So, this theory basically involves the issue of being weighed as a Black woman against a white woman, in that a white woman is seen to be favored by all the legal measures which are supposed to apply equally both to Black and white women. Thus, it can be seen that under this theory, women who are white by race are favored more at the expense of Black women. Okay. Apart from the feminist theories that I was addressing above, there is also another type of theory under feminism, which is known as the Afrocentric feminism. This theory mainly addresses issues that are faced by African women as a continent. Apart from the Eurocentric feminist approaches, there is another feminist theory that is known as Afrocentric, and it specifically addresses the fundamental rights and needs of continental African women. The whole idea behind establishing this approach is to accommodate women's rights and interests using the indigenous concepts, yet not totally eradicating the Eurocentric approach to feminism. It should be noted that African women have been engaged in gender struggle, and this history is often neglected. But because Africa is not a monolith, no single feminist theory of movement reflects the entire range of African women and their experiences and how they are being neglected by the laws as well as the society. It is also important to know that this theory mainly addresses issues that particularly African women face at the hands of legislation that are formulated in Africa. As a concluding statement, it is important to note that feminism is more of a perpetual aspect. It keeps on advancing as time goes by, and yet it is important to know that at the very step of development. In conclusion, the feminist movement have managed to establish the emancipation and recognition of women and their rights at different levels, respectively. The oppression of women was gradually bridged by the development and evolvement of law over the past centuries. However, it can be noted that these theories and movements are not at par. In other words, they work differently and have impacts on the development of law. It is important to also note that these theories are not meant to be constant, but in line with modernity. Every day will bring about a new formulation and a new theory which will be needed to address more and more of women's grievances. Thank you for listening to this